Been a free market, free ideas kind of think tank. They have a very influential publication. It used to be actual magazine, City Journal, that they've always had some diversity of opinion in. And this was sort of a sleepier organization until relatively recently, until certainly the last 5 years. But I think we can go back even a little bit farther until the last decade or so, under which Paul Singer has been chairman. They've been particularly active in trying to get legislation that they author passed, trying to get it in front of particularly state lawmakers, because they think that they have a little bit of an in there. And specifically, they've been extraordinarily successful at that for anti-DEI legislation.
Who are these wealthy donors that y'all worried about?
Well, so Paul Singer is a key one, but this is actually a group of donors that includes a lot at Bloomberg Invest. Dan Loeb. Recently, it has included new trustees like Betsy DeVos, Bill Barr, Rebecca Mercer is a past trustee, John Paulson, who hosted that fundraiser for Trump, also a noted hedge fund manager or former hedge fund manager. He's one of the most significant donors in the last couple of years. And I spoke with Reihan Salam, the president of Manhattan Institute, at length, and he says, these donors, they don't necessarily want payback for a specific policy. They're not coming in and saying, well, give me lower taxes and that's what I'm paying you to do. And this is a nonprofit organization. That said, the whole goal here is we're going to give people actionable policy ideas, and we want to see them instituted, not in some long, lengthy, distant future, but as soon as possible.
You point out this delicious irony in the piece that you have these state legislatures, many states across the country, who are passing this anti-DEI legislation on other issues as well, and it's almost like they're photocopied. I mean, the language is eerily similar in each of these many states. Anyway, the delicious irony is this is being cooked up and put together in Manhattan, of all places, where, of course, Democrats greatly outnumber Republicans. How does that mechanism work, and did you get any insight just into that strategy? We can talk maybe in a few minutes just about sort of the degree to which this think tank is sort of solidly behind former President Trump or not, but how do the mechanics of it work? How have they been so successful kind of pursuing this grassroots strategy?
Yeah, and I should note, model legislation, as it's called, is something that's been pursued both on the right and the left. Essentially, you have think tanks, you have commentators. Sometimes you even have legislators, though not in Manhattan Institute's case specifically. They sit down and they say, I really think that we could have a good policy for this particular issue, and they'll do a lot of the hard work, and then they'll go out and send this to various legislators or groups across the country. That is essentially what's happened here. Specifically, when we talk about the anti-DEI model legislation that's been so successful, that has included noted conservative commentator Christopher Rufo, Ilya Shapiro, also a conservative commentator. Both of these people are pretty well known in right-wing circles, certainly like center-right, but definitely right-wing as well. And so they are the ones who authored this specific piece of legislation. But I should mention that MI has plenty of other legislation, whether it's on the energy transition, restricting subsidies to EVs, solar, wind, et cetera, what you should teach about gender in K-12 education, how you should handle immigration, who gets to come into the country. So there's a lot. This is only the beginning. They've been really successful at this thing, and they're going to try and do some other stuff too.
You also worked on this story with Emily Beerbaum and then also Jeff Green, and then y'all write about how, especially for Singer, that was just necessarily the beginning. So I'm wondering what else is to come in his view.
Well, what's amazing about this organization is they've publicized years and years of their events. So you have to go sit there and listen through them for, I think the count was like 14 or 15 hours.
You did the hard work.
I heard a lot of Paul Singer. Yes. But at one point, he in 2020, he compared what he wants to do with, especially one program of the organization, the Adam Smith Society, to the Federalist Society, which has been incredibly successful at getting conservative judges on the court. And he said he wanted to create some the Adam Smith Society at business schools that would function in a similar way, and really made that comparison. I think that's fair to say. That's the kind of comparison, that's the kind of influence he really wants to generate with this sort of organization.
I said I'd come back to this, and that is, How much is this think tank kind of solidly behind Donald Trump? And maybe you can kind of situate this in this larger moment, because you had Steve Schwarzman throwing his support behind the former president in this campaign. That kind of opened the dam a little bit to other big prominent Wall Street figures throwing their support behind Donald Trump. How does this work as a mechanism for that? We know that Paul Singer is Paul Singer and has espoused these political beliefs for a long while and supports the former president. How much is it solidly a Trump-focused think tank?
Well, Singer for himself, he was in support of Nikki Haley, and at the last time I looked, he had not donated specifically to Trump's campaign in a very similar way as he didn't do that in 2016, and then donated about $1 million for his inauguration. So that, I think, is a way that a lot of these donors jumped behind DeSantis. They jumped behind Nikki Haley was a popular one. So they don't love Trump, but I think there is here an understanding that they have an ability to be influential under a Trump administration, a knowledge that they have built those bridges, whether it's John Paulson, who may end up Treasury Secretary. They had Scott Bessent, another hedge fund manager, at one of their recent events speaking. There's clearly an attempt to curry influence because they believe they will be receptive. These are not the MAGA guys in the sense that these are not sort of middle of the country, rural, poor white Americans. These are hedge fund guys, free market, not neo-populists. But they still believe that they have this line to the Trump world.
Right, and of course we have that presidential debate that's going to be Thursday evening. What do you think we need to be focused on here as far as through the lens of what you were writing about?
Well, I mean, we write a lot about diversity and race in America because a lot's changed in the last years since the murder of George Floyd. I think culture war issues like the ones that Manhattan Institute has been looking at are incredibly divisive. And so even though people say, they're going to vote on the economy, or they're going to vote on how they feel about the price of groceries, say, I think a lot of what may ultimately drive this election is these culture war things. Is abortion, for one, which is not really addressed by Manhattan Institute, but for which there's a lot of political money, but also things like wokeism, DEI, feelings about race, feelings about immigration. These are issues that I think really do matter to a lot of people. So it's important to understand where the money that behind these ideas is coming from, both on the right and the left.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. David Guerrero with Jess Menton in for Tim Stenovic and Carol Masser, who are at Bloomberg Invest, and we're going to turn to them in just a few minutes as the show continues. Simone Foxman with us, talking about her piece, which, as Jess mentioned, is one of the most read on the terminal today. And Simone, you mentioned you spoke with Reihan Salam, who's the president of the Manhattan Institute and has been there for many years. What did he say about the degree to which these donors, including Paul Singer, have a direct effect on the policy agenda or what scholars and fellows there are pursuing? How much can they influence or shape the direction of this particular think tank?
Look, Reihan talked to me about how there's a degree of academic freedom among the fellows, and that everyone should be free to write whatever they want. And frankly, I spoke to people who were current and former employees, and they disputed that characterization, that there is a desire to kind of color within the lines. And even in the past, one fellow, according to an email we obtained, had complained that had said that Paul Singer had complained about an article they wrote on gun control, and that person had been asked not to write for outside publications anymore. Now, they returned to write for outside publications. Ultimately, it's a little unclear whether that continues into the Reihan era, which started in 2019. But it's clear, and donors themselves told me, trustees are extremely active. They feel like they really do have a voice in shaping the way the organization goes. Some of it's self-selecting. The degree to which it comes from the top, there's policy directives. Certainly there's some influence there. The extent to which I think is probably disputes based on exactly who you're talking to and how happy they are exactly with some of the ideas that are promulgated. Yeah.
It's interesting because from a stock market perspective, usually it's gridlock in Congress is what traders typically look for rather than just who's going to hold the presidency, because if there's gridlock, then it's harder for different regulations to swing either way. If you think about energy or big tech or healthcare kind of regulation, I'm wondering, when you're speaking with your sources, what are they saying from that kind of point of view beyond even the presidency, but what they're expecting if you're thinking about the House or the Senate?
I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty going into this election. I think that a lot of Wall Street remembers the lower tax legislation that Trump put in place. Certainly, that's not something that can pass if you have an incredibly divided House and Senate. I think that low tax, light regulation has been a real appeal for Wall Street, which is surprising considering the way stocks and markets have broadly performed under the Biden administration. That said, I think they would like to see some of those tax policies continue. And they think they can control. I think this is the message. They think that there is an ability to control Trump, to rein in some of his wildest urges. Not to leave NATO, not to do something wild that would throw the country in uproar. I don't know if that's true, and it's not my. Again, as a journalist, we try and be objective here. They seem to believe this strongly. Say the critics on the left say no, they can't. Who's to listen to Wall Street anyway? Why was Middle America listen to wealthy people on Wall Street in this political climate?